Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. No Country for Cowards. I've been an urban explorer for over 2 years and I've seen some awesome stuff, but amusement parks, specifically Disney parks, are an urban explorer's brass ring. Once my best friend began working at WDW, which I'm going to use that acronym so, the mouse doesn't get upset, I'd finally grabbed a hold of the ring. The River Country, which is an older Disney water park, had been abandoned since about 2001. And I've heard so many stories about the park, but none of them had done the mystery of it justice. Back in the early 80s, there was a brain-eating amoeba that killed an 11-year-old boy, but as many know, that has nothing to do with its closing. It appears the park conflicted with new laws that had been passed. But River Country was much different than other parks. When you go to the main WDW parks, you get the Disney feeling. You truly feel like you're in a magical place. But with River Country, you get a different feeling. An odd feeling, like you're an outsider. I remember standing in front of the dilapidated lake in the middle of the park and I just felt like something wanted me to get out. I really wish I would have. But let's go back to when I first found out that I was going to get the chance to go into the park. My friend was working a job that would give him access to RC. Again, trying to keep it ambiguous so I don't upset the mouse. He told me that on a Sunday night, he would be willing to allow me to walk through the park, but only for 2 hours. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest in excitement. I arrived in Orlando on March 17th. I was going to stay the week at my friend's house. His home was only 10 miles from that place, DWD, so it worked out perfectly. The first night there, he stirred up my excitement with a story that he claimed was told to him by a former security officer. My SO friend told me that one night he was sent in there to check in on a suit. A suit is essentially the highest security job at DWD. But anyways, management hadn't heard from the suit for hours. He had been sent into the River Country to inspect a possible intruder. So my SO friend goes into the park and is immediately enticed by a voice screaming for help. The voice was coming from one of the lake docks. On the dock sat the suit, sobbing like a baby. Next to him sat a girl dressed all in black, blood flowing from cuts on her wrist. My friend looks down to grab his radio, and when he looks up, the suit was still there, but the girl was gone. He quit the day after he told me the story. You have no idea how excited I was after he told me the story. As an urban explorer, this RC place itself was exciting, but as a paranormal lover, the story made the park sound even more amazing. The next day, I went to the actual DWD park. I rode in with my friends at 6 in the morning with a big childish smile on my face and $400 in my pocket. I first went to Hollywood Studios, which was my second favorite as a kid. I sat near the front of the park for nearly 2 hours, spending most of my time FaceTiming with my girlfriend. Finally at 9, I was one of the first people to enter the park that day. Oh Jesus, I was like a child again. Nostalgia hit me like a ton of bricks as I took in the atmosphere of the park. But that nostalgia was completely crushed as I started going on the rides. On the Tower of Terror, I had my first weird encounter. During the part where you travel through the hallway, as soon as the doors opened, I noticed someone wearing an old army uniform behind one of the walls. It was very obvious that the person was trying to hide. They even had a giant grin on their face. I thought that this was part of the ride, but nobody else was reacting to it. I just brushed it off and thought they didn't see him. My next odd occurrence was on the Great Movie Ride. It was about noon and it had gotten incredibly hot, so I was already a bit flustered at this point. At the Wizard of Oz part, I noticed something a few feet behind the Wicked Witch. I adjusted my glasses and looked harder. It was a soldier again, but this time he looked like a corpse that had been worked on at a funeral home, so artificial. But the giant grin still covered his face. After my second sighting, I decided that it was time that I changed parks. Once I left, I hopped on a bus to Magic Kingdom. I had the time of my life there, plus no more incidents. The only odd thing that happened was, I think I saw a group of suits. 3 men in black polos were rushing towards Space Mountain. Other than that, the nostalgia overtook me. I felt like a kid again. Around 11 that night, my friend finished his shift and picked me up. We both drove right home. I told him what I saw that day. Wait, seriously? An old worker went around telling a story of something else happening in the great movie ride last summer. He described to me what the former worker saw, but it was completely different. Later, I spent an hour packing for the next day. 1 digital camera, 2 camcorders, 2 phone chargers, food, and water. It felt like I was going to war rather than exploring an abandoned park. The plan for the next day was this. My friend would get off work at 8:30. He would come pick me up, then he would drop me off at RC. Then he would wait at Magic Kingdom until I was ready. I barely slept that night. Sunday leading up to arriving at RC felt so unreal. I was going to explore the first official abandoned Disney park. The excitement filled my body up until the point where my friend drove away after dropping me off. I opened the metal gates and peered into the entrance. The excitement was replaced by pure fear. River Country is closed, a dilapidated sign read. The Fox Water Tower that stood in the entrance had a banner on it reading the same message. I hadn't even stepped inside the park, but I could tell something was up. I clenched the straps on my bag and stepped inside the park. The pathway was lit up by dull bulbs. This surprised me. Why wouldn't the electricity be shut off? I snapped a few pictures of the sign and water tower and headed to my first destination, the nature trail. The Florida environment seemed intent on taking back this park, so it was hard enough trying to find the entrance to the trail, but as per a map I got off the internet, I found it. This is where I also found my first artifact. I'll get to that later. Literally directly to the right of the trail's opening, I noticed something white covered by plants. I bent down and moved the plants out of the way. It was a Mickey Mouse glove. I used a stick to move it around before I snapped a few pictures. I noticed a jelly-like substance on its palm. The nature trail didn't have any light, so I had to use my flashlight. Maneuvering around all the plants and trees was infuriating, but what I found halfway through made it worth it. On the side of the trail, next to a snow-white tree, was a sign that sat on a pedestal. Dumping grounds, the sign read. That's when I decided to fire up one of my video cameras. As I documented the sign, I felt like I got hit by a big wave. My head felt as light as a balloon. I stumbled around like I was fighting a powerful bout of vertigo. I got really nervous, so I sped up through the trail. Just as I was about to leave the trail, I heard something in the bushes on my right. My heart started racing, so I broke out into a complete sprint until I reached the end of the trail. I practically fell down the stairs at the exit. Once I was out, I reminded myself that what I heard was probably just an animal. I sat down on the stairs, chuckling to myself when I noticed something under some plants a few feet in front of me. Using a stick, I moved the plants. A plastic eye was covered by weeds. It was in a long, oval shape too. I made a Rorschach sound before I snapped a few pictures of it. I then made my way towards the slides that went into the main pool. On my way, I passed a towel return pavilion, and inside the pavilion, a bright red light caught my eye. The wooden window at the front was slightly open, so I moved it to the side. Inside the pavilion sat 2 things. A camcorder, nearly identical to mine, was set up on a table, recording, and a white wig sat next to it. I reached into the pavilion and pulled out both items. The wig seemed identical to the hair that the ghost in a haunted mansion had. I snapped a few pictures before pulling out my video camera. I was going out to document myself going through the videos on the camcorder. The first video was 15 minutes long. It featured a family, mom, dad, 2 daughters, just going through the Magic Kingdom. The cameraman responsibility was shared by the mother and the father. They looked so happy throughout the whole video. The second video was only 25 seconds long. It featured the father holding the camera and sprinting through the Sport Disney Pop Hotel courtyard. It was at night, and the father sounded frantic. He briefly pointed the camera behind him, and what I saw sent chills down my spine. A black silhouette of a monstrous thing was chasing him. The video ended with the father dropping the camera. Thoroughly creeped out, I set the camcorder and wig onto the pavilion counter. Turning on my video camera's flashlight, I continued my trek to the slides. Should I just leave? I asked myself questions like that over and over. The atmosphere of the park made me feel so uneasy. It was like something wanted me to get out. Once I got to the slides, I felt a sense of urgency to get up the stairs as quick as I could. It reminded me of when I would run up the basement stairs as a child to avoid the monster. So I did just that. I nearly fell a few times, but I got up the stairs in seconds. Below the slides were 2 pools. I held the video camera to my side and took pictures with my digital camera. It felt so odd that 20 years ago, these pools were filled by thousands of children every day. Hey! My breathing halted and my body froze up. The raspy, angry voice that called out to me came from right below the slides. I moved my flashlight downwards and I saw him. The soldier from the day before was standing next to the pool where the slides emptied. He didn't look like a fresh corpse anymore. He now looked rotted and decayed. He had no nose, but his haunting grin stayed intact. He stared right into my eyes like he was burrowing into my soul. He waved enthusiastically and then skipped towards the stairs leading up to the slides. My heart was beating faster than it ever has. I could hear footsteps approaching the winding stairs. I looked over the edge of the slides. They had some water in them, but if I jumped, I would easily shatter my legs. But I had to make a decision, either jump or face what was coming up the stairs. I closed my eyes, prepared to jump, but then I noticed something. Silence. No footsteps were coming up the slide. I took out my flashlight and positioned myself so I could see every stair. Nobody was coming up, but a piece of paper with a rock on top of it was now sitting on the bottom stair. I scurried down, grabbed the paper, and leaned on the wall behind me to avoid a sneak attack. Dig up the secrets or leave scarred. I guess I was going to have to invest in some therapy because I chose to leave scarred. I just broke out into sprint, weaving around hoping that I would find an exit. I eventually reached the main lake. Shit, that was directly in the middle of the park. I stood on the docks and stared at the lake, trying to catch my breath and reconfigure my brain. Something had to be fucking with me. Sir? I whipped around and gripped the end of my flashlight, prepared to swing it, but the voice behind me came from a security officer. He was wearing an older-looking uniform and mouse ears, but I assumed he was still a security officer. Oh, thank God. I know I shouldn't be here, but something isn't right. Someone is screwing with me. Please, help me out of here. The security officer just looked at me like a father is ready to scold his child. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but he didn't. His face quickly changed from anger to a look of pure anguish. His mouth just dropped open and his eyes went into his head. I started to move backwards, but he moved forward. That's when blood just started to pour out of his nose like a faucet. I tried to move back more, but I tripped over a fake life preserver. My bag, video camera, and digital camera all flew from my possession and into the lake. I closed my eyes as the guard fell to his knees. But when I opened them, he was gone. Did I finally get a breather? Hell no. As I sat up, I heard splashing about 25 feet behind me. I twisted around and tried to make out the source of what was in the water. The moon provided just enough light to see it, the same figure from the video on the camcorder. It was a humanoid figure, but it was completely featureless, and instead it was jet black all around. It was holding a decaying goofy head, and it was heading for me. I took a deep breath, hopped to my feet, and started to sprint away. As I began moving, I heard something land next to me. It was the goofy head. Its eyes stared into mine, acknowledging me. The next couple of minutes were a complete blur. With no flashlight, I was running aimlessly, hoping to find some exit. Also, all around me, I could hear people. It started off as normal theme park noises, but after a couple of seconds, the voice sounded frantic. That's when the screaming started. I was too terrified to look behind me to make sure that the silhouette wasn't following me. I didn't want to chance it. Finally, after a minute of sprinting, I reached the fence. I jumped up, grabbed the top, and vaulted myself over it. Luckily, I had my phone in my pocket, so I immediately called my friend and begged him to come grab me. I was actually only a couple 100 feet from the entrance. He told me that he was on his way and hung up. I sat against the fence, exhausted and terrified. I looked next to me, and under a collection of stones sat a small ripped piece of paper. "You can't expose me," it read. I just started laughing. Not that I still thought that someone was screwing with me. I was laughing at the sheer madness of the last 27 minutes. I'm actually pretty sure that I laughed until my friend picked me up. So why am I telling this story now, when it's all happened nearly 4 months ago? Well, that's because my story doesn't end there. The scariest things came up while I was trying to research what I had seen. I'll spare you every little detail, but from late March to mid-June, I tried to connect everything odd I had seen that night. Last week, I finally pieced it all together. The soldier. Through multiple sources, I learned that on July 9, 1976, a 49-year-old World War II veteran died in the parking lot of the original Disney World. He had gotten into an argument with another driver, a fight ensued, and the vet ended up dying after slamming his head on the ground. His picture matched the man I had seen. Oh, but he didn't die at Disney. Nobody dies at Disney. This is a recurring theme for some of the other explanations. The security guard? Do you think the 11-year-old boy was the only person to fall into River Country's brain-eating amoeba? Nope. 2 weeks before that boy died, a longtime security guard also passed away. The guard had been working at River Country when he was forced to wrestle with a very high lifeguard in the main lake. It is my belief that during the scuffle, the security guard accidentally got some of the lake silt up his nose. A week after this incident, the guard died. Official death? Brain aneurysm. Bullshit. I did some work, but I got to look at hospital records. He had the same symptoms that the 11-year-old boy suffered from before his death. The Mickey glove? This one was extremely tough. I've connected it to 5 possible stories, but this is the front runner. In August of 2011, an employee was convicted of the rape of 4 minors. I had to go through some grisly court docs before I made a connection. The worker used a specific type of lubrication for each crime. After even more digging, I discovered that the lube looked exactly like the jelly that was in the hand. Oh, and the guy's job? He played the mouse. Yeah, that's right. That was his costume. The video. This is still pretty much a mystery, but I think I have something. Back in late 2009, a woman posted on tons of forums asking people if they had seen her daughter and her family. The woman posted a picture, and they were the same people from the video. But after doing some name searches, every person in that video is alive, and well, I'll have to research more. The Haunted Mansion wig. This was the hardest thing to connect. It took me 2 months of digging to attach a story that would fit. Back in 2003, a WDW worker went missing right after he clocked out. After a 2-day search, his body was found. His car had fallen into a swamp near his house. After the police pulled his car out of the water, the body was inspected. Cause of death? A single shot to the back of the head. He had been shot execution style. But how does the wig come into this? Well, in the trunk of his car was a broken ghost prop from the haunted mansion. I did some more research to find that the ghost hair was identical to the wig I had found. The plastic eye? This was too vague to make a connection, but I found the other one in my mailbox on May 4th, after I had gotten the court docs for the Mickey hand. And last but not least, the shadow monster. This one is going to take some suspension of disbelief. When Disney was being built, there was a lot of controversy concerning the land that the park was going on. Some of the land belonged to a group of Native American families who had lived there for a really long time. These families were practically thrown to the side by DWD, and their land was desecrated. Now, I have heard of a former worker that gave first-hand accounts of seeing this creature that they said resembled a skinwalker. But the creature that I'm talking about is a bit different. I'm talking about a form of shapeshifter that adapts to the environment around them. Who was the main mascot for River Country? Goofy. But I didn't make this connection on account of the mascot head alone. But picture Goofy right now. He has a dog-like head, but the rest of his body's pretty much just a jet black, featureless body. Now take away Goofy's head and gloves, and add in a featureless jet black human head. That is exactly what I saw that night. River Country was once Disney's most thriving water park, but today, from what I've seen, it's a dumping ground for their dirty secrets. But I've seen videos of people exploring River Country, and none of that stuff was in there. So I asked those people about the day before they explored, and if they were contacted by something within those grounds. It felt like the soldier was inviting me into his world so I could discover their truth. I just hope that this gets big enough that somebody gets more answers than I got. I just don't want to end up for real like one of those spirits that you see at the haunted mansion. One coyote howls. I want to start out by saying this story is 100% true. I know people will say that to add immersion, but it really is. Do I believe that everything that happened actually happened? Not necessarily. I'm as skeptical as you will be, and I welcome any explanation as to how the events that occurred were not supernatural. It could have been an elaborate prank on behalf of my friends, but there are several reasons why I find that hard to believe. Mass hysteria? Maybe. Who knows? Anyway, here's the story. I enlisted in the Army in 2009 and had my AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training, in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Pretty much any soldier station at Fort Huachuca, often nicknamed Fort We Gotcha, has above average intelligence. Most of the MOSs require a very high ASVAB score. Needless to say, the friends I made were a unique bunch, many of us gaming nerds. Huachuca is about 20 minutes from the Mexican border and about 40 minutes from the infamous Tombstone, Arizona. One day we were bored and swapping ghost stories. One of my buddies bought a Ouija board at Walmart for us to play around with. We'll call him Jackson to protect his identity. I'm not sure Jackson believed in the supernatural, but when your disposable income to free time ratio is skewed horribly in the wrong direction, you buy stupid shit to entertain yourself with. Jackson and I attempted to use the Ouija board in our barracks, as the base is extremely old and rife with hauntings. Unfortunately, the barracks we had recently moved to were brand new, so the Ouija didn't work. Tired of strip clubs and flirting with the Mexican border, we hungered for a unique adventure. I brought up the idea of traveling to nearby Tombstone. Jackson lit up when I mentioned this, as he had just heard a story of a haunted house in Tombstone he wanted to check out. We came to a quick ghost hunting consensus and invited our buddy Thompson along for the ride. We arrived at Tombstone shortly after dark. It was not quite how I expected it. I had pictured a literal ghost town with a few dilapidated Wild West buildings and the obligatory tumbleweed blowing through the street. This was not the case at all. Even at night, it's basically a normal town with a few historical buildings and tourist traps. In addition to the downtown stretch, they have a residential area just like any other small town in America. It was in this residential area that we began hunting for the supposed haunted house. We got to the area we thought it was in, but weren't sure which house it was. After a few minutes of circling the block, the group decided to take a break to piss. Everyone went a separate direction to pee, but I could not find a place private enough, so I didn't go. I was the second person back in the car. I climbed into the back seat and asked Jackson, "Where's Thompson?" "I don't know. He's been gone for a while. I'll text him," said Jackson. All of a sudden, Thompson, looking wider than he normally does, comes sprinting towards the car and frantically tries to open the passenger door. Jackson calmly unlocks the door and lets him in and asks, "What happened?" "Dude, you're not going to believe this shit," Thompson gasped. His southern drawl tightened like a cello string. "I was in this house that looked abandoned, right? So I go in and look around and decide to have a smoke. I look down at my phone to text you guys and tell you about it when all of a sudden something touched my shoulder." "Holy shit! What was it?" I asked. "Nothing. There was nothing there. I sprinted back to the car." Pumped with adrenaline, curiosity, and stupidity, I suggested we go full mystery machine and park in a nearby lot and use the Ouija board from inside the car. As soon as we could get parked, roughly half a block away, we anxiously pulled out the Ouija board and put it in our laps. As the person designated to ask questions, I began, "Is there anyone there?" To my disbelief, the planchette started moving. It slowly but surely moved towards yes. "Were you the thing that touched Thompson?" "Yes," it replied again. "Are you the ghost in the haunted house we are going to visit?" "No," it answered. Now, this is what took me by surprise. If this was one of the other guys trying to scare us, why wouldn't it take the obvious bait? Claim to be the ghost we saw and commence scaring the shit out of us. I mean, that's like a Nigerian scammer writing you about your long-lost fortune and then responding no when you ask if he's able to give you $6 million instead of $5.5 million. At this point, I had a flashback of just about every creepy Ouija board I had ever seen or read about. They always start with some cliche questions like, "Lol, how did you die?" and ended with, "Oh my fucking God," and a flurry of telekinetic activity. I wanted this session to be different. After all, we were a hand-picked bunch of intelligent people, not a group of scared teenagers. If this was real, I wanted this specter to break history with me. So I took a moment and started thinking, what would I want to know about a ghost? What question can I ask that aren't cliche? What can I ask that will break the linear decision tree where all Ouija boards end up telling you they want you dead? I realized any questions I asked had to be extremely specific and offer no chance for creepy deviation in the answer. I suppose I could ask it for the coefficient of pi, and it could just respond with "die bitch" over and over, but I had faith in the ghost. So the first question I asked was, "Name one thing the building you touched Thompson in was used for." The planchette slowly started to move again. I thought to myself, this thing can't possibly get creepy from this question. I bet I'll say like general store or post office or slaughter. SLAUGHTER. Pucker factor 9. Good game, ghost. Have an upvote, I guess. But seriously, I again realized this was probably not one of us joking around, because slaughter has not been used as a common term since the 1800s. You don't log onto CNN and see "man slaughtered today in small house in Arizona, details at 11. If my friends were pulling a prank, the easiest verb would have been something like murder or butt sex. Intrigued, I decided to ask why it touched Thompson. "HELP, it replied. Thinking this would lead somewhere creepy, I asked when it died instead. 1867. 1867? I again started thinking of questions I could ask that no one ever thinks to ask a ghost. I remember hearing on some website that you are never supposed to ask a Ouija board about God. So I did the only logical thing an atheist would do at that point. Why aren't I supposed to ask you about God? No, came a quick, terse reply. So I tried to be more creative. I asked it, "Hey, if you were playing World of Warcraft, what class would you play?" It's going to say Undead Warlock. I guarantee I... No, it snapped again. It was weird. Despite being an entity that couldn't directly talk to us, you could almost sense its tone of voice through how it moved the planchette. I wanted to continue asking it questions, but our first sergeant interrupted the session with a frantic phone call. He ordered all of us back to base for 100% accountability due to someone losing their weapon. Disappointed, we packed up and headed back. The next day, we were telling the others in our platoon about our experience the night before. After many bullshit and eye rolls, another soldier named Green showed interest. We decided to try to talk to the ghost again and take Green with us. He had an SUV which would give us more than room to set up the board. As a soldier, my first instinct was not only to plan our arrival and departure time, but safety contingencies as well. This was especially on my mind after the previous night. I briefed the group in advance that if anything creepy happened, we were better off with a pre-identified plan on what to do so as to take the spirits by surprise. Our ghost hunting SOP was as follows. At approximately 2000 hours, we will depart for Tombstone. This will allow us to arrive after dark. We will take 2 vehicles, Green's SUV and Jackson's coupe. Jackson and Thompson will ride in the coupe, while Green and I will ride in the SUV. We will set up our session in the SUV so as to allow for a quick departure if anything spooky happens. We will leave any weapons or sharp objects back at the base. Spirits can only harm others by proxy. If there are no objects around to throw, or possess someone into using, then the only physical danger will be soiling our underwear. In the event of one of us feeling creeped out beyond belief, or an impending sense of doom, we will give an obvious signal to the others to quickly pack up and leave. Each soldier will return to the vehicle they traveled in and take off back to the base. Upon leaving the scene, the vehicles will immediately establish contact via cell phone to ensure safety and share in a moment of, "Holy shit, what the fuck just happened?" So it was settled. We had our plan, and we were feeling confident. The undead were no match for Arizona's finest soldiers. We parked in the same lot we had the night before and eagerly took out our Ouija board. There were 4 of us now, and we were feeling confident. But I won't lie if I told you that I was jittery as fuck. Literally everything I knew about life and the universe at this point was challenged by what we had seen the previous night. I felt like the equivalent of someone who discovers a 6-inch tall genie in their closet that only they can talk to. It literally felt surreal, like a movie. Green was especially nervous about being with us, as he was raised Catholic. Though he was no longer religious, he still had that strongly ingrained fear of Ouija boards. Green opted to just spectate as we placed a planchette on the board. There were 3 of us controlling it. We started by asking if anyone was there and received a very slow, strained yes. I asked if it was the same being we talked to the previous night, and it said no. Going off the same theme as last night, I wanted to mindfuck the ghost. I did not want to give it the opportunity to be creepy, and I wanted it to answer questions no one would think to ask. I wanted to expose the ghost's vulnerabilities. As of now, the ghost was this mysterious, all-powerful being. However, as any logical person knows, the paranormal is just science not yet discovered. The ghost must have limits, I thought. It isn't God, and therefore has things it cannot do, things it cannot have. So I had the bright idea to ask, "What is one thing you want that you cannot have?" Life, it answered. Life. I wasn't sure whether to feel like an ass, idiot, or both. Before I could decide between shame and stupidity, the interior light in the Green's brand new SUV flickered. Holy fucking shit. That doesn't just happen. The only time I've ever seen a light flicker in a car was when it was being started. This was getting a little too real. The spirit was alpha, and it was asserting its ethereal dominance. After regaining my composure, I began to brainstorm more questions. "You've been asking it all the questions. Let me give it a try," Thompson contested me. "Fine, go ahead," I said. "What do you want from us?" he asked in his defiant Georgia accent. STEV. Dude, there's no fucking way, I thought to myself. My name is Steven and all, but there is no EN. At this point I was terrified. No one there knew my first name but Thompson. Also, the planchette was moving in a puppeted fashion, away from Thompson when it spelled it out. The best way I could describe it was an invisible thread, straight from the front of the car, pulling the planchette, based on how it twisted and turned. There was no one in the front of the car. Before I could even react, the center console, which was about 5 inches ajar, closed by itself. It calmly invoked our military plan of action. Okay, guys. It just spelled out my first name. Let's get the fuck out of here. No one said a word or hesitated for a second. Thompson and Jackson scrambled out of the SUV and into Jackson's Eclipse. Green and I piled into the front seat of the SUV. Green immediately shifted to drive and peeled out of the dusty lot. I'm not sure Ford Escape has ever been used in such a literal fashion. Green was in shock, and so was I. My atheist brain was questioning if God might actually be real, and Green's devout brain was pondering the opposite. Our trance was broken by Green's alt-rock ringtone. It was surreal hearing pop culture in that moment, when our brains were so far removed from reality. Green answered the phone. It was Jackson and Thompson. Their car wouldn't start. They had never left Tombstone. Green slams on the brakes and bangs a U-turn that would put Vin Diesel in diapers. He floors the modest SUV. We were going about 100 miles per hour, heading down Arizona 82, back towards Tombstone. "Dude, slow the fuck down," I yelled. At this point, I was far more afraid of Green's driving than the spirits. "They're our fucking friends. We can't leave them there." We knew the general direction back to Tombstone and arrived rather quickly. Tombstone isn't as tiny as you'd imagine, and we couldn't quite remember where we had parked at. As I'm trying to figure out where we are, Green freaks the fuck out. "Oh my God." "What, dude?" I'm not driving the car anymore." "What the fuck are you talking about?" "I can't move." As if it couldn't get any more frightening, I realized in the middle of Green's outburst that we had inadvertently ended up at the parking lot we left. I'm always trying to think logically, so I deduced the following. At this point, two things are possible. One, Green is possessed by a butt-hurt ghost who basically told me to check my living privilege. Two, Green is experiencing a psychotic breakdown. Either one of those is a threat to our safety at this point. So I just started shouting at him with simple commands. If he was possessed or simply psychotic, simple instructions were the best course of action. "Green, stop the car." "Green, stop the car." "Green, stop the car," I ordered in a commanding voice. Eventually, logic and reason fought off whatever had possessed him, and he pulled over. I switched seats with him and began driving. Right after I took over driving, Jackson called and let us know they were safe and about 10 miles down the road towards base. Green was still in a trance, but once we got about a quarter mile from ground zero, whatever triggered him without warning originally had left. This leads me to believe that if ghosts are real, they have the effective possession range of a quarter mile. Throughout the ride, we struggled to comprehend what had happened that night. Green told me that he could tell the ghost wanted me and that it was telling him to drive down an alley, but that he came to his senses in time. He said it wanted me bad, and it wanted him to kill me. It probably would have had him attack me before we left, but our premeditated escape took it by surprise, so it stalled Jackson's car to lure us back. I asked him why it didn't just kill me itself, and he told me, "Probably because I'm bigger than you and more emotional. You think very logically. You're a lot harder for a spirit to manipulate. Plus, I was in control of the car." This made sense and was pretty chilling to think about. If the spirit had succeeded, it would have simply hit the news as "Soldier murders other soldier in Tombstone, PTSD suspected." I imagine that's the case when you hear about mothers spontaneously drowning their children in a bathtub or other inexplicable murder-suicides. It's probably a ghost or spirit, but gets blamed on psychosis. About halfway back to base, we stopped at a gas station. Green, still not completely in his right mind, opened the hatch of his SUV, took out a sunshade that came with his car, and threw it in the dump store. "What did you do that for?" "I don't know. It just felt evil. Really evil," he answered. That was the final straw on how real this was. It really drove in how much this was probably not an elaborate prank. Why would he go to the extent of throwing away an expensive OEM part of his car to freak me out when I was already emotionally exhausted? To this day, I'm still an atheist, but I do wonder about the paranormal, as it could very well be science not yet discovered. I would imagine that communicating with a spirit is the equivalent of trying to talk to an invisible man in the room who cannot touch anything. His only way of communicating is holding a portable fan and blowing paper suspended by a string from the ceiling. He blows it right for yes and left for no. I imagine this is why they communicate in such slow and brief answers. I did a little bit more research on the location, and ironically, we were in the parking lot for the OK Corral, the famous haunted location where the outlaws had their shootout in the 1800s. From what I can gather, the gunfight happened well after 1867. But keep in mind, we talked to two separate spirits. I can't help but wonder if the second one was one of them. Also, I have heard of the ideomotor effect, and I'm also aware of Occam's razor, and would welcome a shave at this point, as I think it would save my sanity.